The way I feel is the world is a lesser place. The entire world is a lesser place without Mark. He was an exceptional person.
I miss his smile. I miss his joie de vivre. I miss his demands that everybody work as fast as they can.
Mais il n'y aura pas un deuxième Dr. Wainberg. Il y aura juste un.
Canada has lost a giant. Dr. Mark Wainberg passed away tragically yesterday at the age of 71. Professor Wainberg was known for his part in the discovery of the antiviral drug 3TC in 1989, and his work was continuing at both the Jewish General Hospital and the McGill University AIDS Centre.
You have to remember in the early 80s, there was 3 cities, Montreal, San Francisco, and New York, that had this raging epidemic and people were dying. And he came and he recognized this. And as when I was speaking to Nobby Gilmore, there were gay men who were dying, nobody knew what it was. There were doctors who didn't know how to handle it, and there were scientists. And they needed a leader to group all these fledgling people who wanted to tackle a disease. He crystallized a group. He made the first lab in Canada to harvest the virus, to grow the virus. Without that, he was the first person to discover resistance to the first drug available, AZT. He needed a drug, so he went to Belleau and he said, make me a drug. And he got a drug, and then he had to get it through the world.
His lab was involved in the development of the anti-HIV drug called 3TC. I think many people know that. And his lab showed that that compound can inhibit HIV in tissue culture, showing that this compound can be used as an HIV treatment. And this drug has saved millions of people's lives and is still used now in HIV treatment.
You know, just in the same way, I think that HIV clinical trials research really was very much based on clinical trials in cancer. And, you know, each disease interacts with every other disease. You know, right now we're seeing, as an example, a lot more cancers in HIV-infected people than in the population at large. So obviously there are linkages, you know, with every other disease, and we are all interdependent. And there are probably many examples, really, of how HIV has benefited other disease conditions.
As a scientist, he was about the most complete scientist that you can imagine, because in truth, all scientists, somewhere in their psyche, imagine their discovery, their ideas, their work that they do in the laboratory having an impact on human beings. Mark did that work in the laboratory and then followed through, not just to the level of commercializing and seeing to the introduction of his work into clinical practice, but then he saw barriers, economic barriers, political barriers. He worked with NGOs, with pharma, with governments.
As drugs developed in the HIV field in North America and in Europe, he saw that the epidemic, the epicenter of the epidemic was in Africa. And he needed and he wanted those people to have equal access to drugs. And it propelled him
to describe the most important thing I ever did in my life, that it was the roles that I played in enabling the Durban Conference to take place. And I don't want to pretend that it was an easy time. It wasn't. But certainly it was the conference that changed the world. Durban highlighted throughout the world that it was not acceptable to have two different worlds. One world in which everybody could take access to antiretroviral drugs for granted, and a different world in which the drugs were virtually non-available, which meant that anybody who contracted HIV in a developing country setting was more or less, at the time, condemned to die. And people came away from the Durban Conference, including politicians, saying this situation is untenable, we cannot allow this situation to continue. And of course, some of the politicians, including from Canada, who were at the conference, went home, reported to their governments, and then governments throughout the world started to enact measures that would result ultimately in a great change.
Ce dont je me souviens quand je suis arrivée, c'est qu'il avait beaucoup de journalistes après lui, parce qu'il y avait beaucoup de controverses. Il y avait encore des gens à ce moment-là qui disaient que le VIH n'était pas la cause du sida, et puis il s'est battu pour ça, entre autres avec le président d'Afrique du Sud à ce moment-là. Donc, il n'a pas eu gain de cause tout de suite en Afrique du Sud, mais après, bon, ça a fait son chemin, et effectivement, tout le monde a reconnu qu'il avait raison. Mais il n'a pas eu peur vraiment de parler haut et fort, et même de dire au président d'Afrique du Sud que c'était un criminel en refusant le traitement du sida qu'il y avait à cette époque-là.
En 2000, quand le congrès est arrivé, le premier congrès, il y avait à peu près moins de 1% des gens d'Afrique, du continent africain, qui avaient accès à la trithérapie. Aujourd'hui, on parle de 40 à 50% des gens en Afrique ont accès à la trithérapie. Donc, ça a été un combat qu'il a fait avec d'autres, mais c'est rare que des chercheurs de laboratoire font ce genre de combat-là.
He was the largest gatherer of mileage points at Aeroplan in Air Canada. I think he had 3 million points, visited 120 countries. The commitment to do this, still be head of the Lady Davis for I think about 10 years, and to also run a very committed and successful research lab, took an extraordinary person. He had an unlimited amount of energy, and I didn't appreciate how broad his commitment to many important causes was. You know, until his funeral and talking to people subsequently, I hadn't appreciated at all how deeply involved he was with the congregation of his synagogue. And there were many little anecdotes of him being kind to people who needed kindness. Just an exceptional individual. He took very literally what many scientists fantasize about, which is having our work impact human beings, and he took it to whatever degree was necessary to make sure that he had the greatest impact, and he did. He realized all that. So he's a realistic scientist with a very big heart, tremendous steely determination, who got his way. The gap in the research community at the Lady Davis and at McGill is huge. I think people were understandably devastated. His legacy in the basic research world will be not only his discoveries, but the people he trained and the young faculty he brought along. And the faculty you have here now working on HIV and AIDS are outstanding. And they're all people who were brought along and encouraged by Mark, and they were particularly, understandably, devastated by his unexpected death.
On a perdu un grand morceau dans le puzzle, un grand morceau. Maintenant, il faudra le rapiécer tranquillement, mais je pense qu'on va s'en sentir longtemps. Puis je ne sais pas l'impact même au niveau de la recherche sur le sida au Canada. Il y avait une telle puissance, un tel pouvoir au niveau des instances politiques aussi pour influencer, pour aller chercher du financement. Je pense que ça va être plus difficile.
I'm an optimist. I think we're going to be able to cure HIV over the next 2 decades. I really mean that. I think that the research community is for the first time galvanized toward accomplishing this goal. And I think our understanding of HIV disease has grown so much in regard to how the virus does what it does, in other words, pathogenesis, that we will soon have many more tools available to us to combat HIV and hopefully cure HIV than have been available until now. So I'm a real optimist in this regard.